and sports gambling specifically.
Okay. Yeah. Coming to you live from the heart of the free state of New Hampshire. This is The Independence with Carla, Gericke. And now, here's your host, Carla, Gericke.
Hi, guys, and welcome. Week's over. I'm looking forward to the weekend. In fact, we'll be going to see Robbie the Fire Bernstein at the Shell, one of our sort of sister clubs, I guess is a nice way to describe it, out on the seacoast tomorrow. I believe there are still tickets on sale for that, so definitely go check that out. He's done several shows here over the years, and it is Valentine's Day, so grab a couple of tickets, grab some friends, grab the loved one, and head out to the Shell tomorrow evening, Saturday, February 14th. I believe it starts at 7 or 8 p.m. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is the After Hours edition, and we will be having a ghost. Oh, my goodness. I'm so tired, so everything's going to be a little iffy tonight. I will be having a guest joining me in a moment. But before I get to that, I want to remind everyone, please go get your Liberty Forum tickets. Liberty Forum is coming up March 5th through the 9th at the Grapponi Center in Concord. And if it looks like I'm dragging ass, I am dragging ass. I had a very long day with a lot of exercise on top of a lot of other things. But what I spent most of my day doing was inputting data for the government to get my paperwork with the charitable trust in order for one of the two sort of secession or independence nonprofits that I personally am involved in. But the guest I will be welcoming to tonight's edition, where we're going to do a really deep dive, has his own ideas and his own flavor about how we can see independence, true independence in New Hampshire, and if not that, then strategies to definitely help to bring movers to New Hampshire for people who want to protect wealth. So my guest tonight is Steve Villee. Steve has been working with me for many years, both as treasurer on some nonprofits. He's heavily involved with the LP&H. He is a very smart man. I know that part because he is in Mensa, if I remember correctly. And so I'm really, really excited to be able to have this conversation tonight. The book, just so that we can make sure everyone does, oh, it's too white for that. Sorry, here we go, is Club 75 Alliance Manifesto by Steve Villee. And we'll be talking about the ideas in this book. But before we get into all of that stuff, why don't you tell the folks back home just a little bit about who's Steve and what's your moving story?
Okay, yes. So thank you, Carla, for having me. I'm very glad to be here. I'm a software developer. I've been a software developer pretty much all my life. And I've lived in Arizona. I've lived in New York. And 20-something years ago, I was one of the first movers for the Free State Project. I was mover number 6, so I'm told.
Wow.
Yes. December of 2003. So it's been a fun ride. I've been blessed to meet an awful lot of Free Staters, and I would like to say that I get along with pretty much everyone. So, but my particular interest is secession and specifically income tax. And so I've put together this project, the Club 75 Alliance, and the book we'll be talking about is the manifesto for that project. I'm also running for governor as libertarian, and really the main purpose of that is to promote essentially this Club 75 Alliance. And it's also to, in my way, promote the Free State Project. For me, this is it's like my magnum opus. It's my greatest practical effect, effort, whatever.
Effort.
Yes. So to me, it's all the same thing. We want liberty. We want smaller government. So what more can I say? I guess I can just dive into the...
Yeah. So, you and I have been doing a fair amount of independence work together over
Yes.
the years. One of the things I think speaks to the Free State Project and sort of the strategy of concentrating together is that we have several different independence movements. And I don't think it's like the joke about the Baptist churches, which just become more and more.
Yeah.
I think it's because we're curious people and we like to come to problems with different sort of solutions.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, sort of help people understand where you're coming from.
Okay. What makes my approach different from, I think, most like yours and the other secession efforts is two things. One, the timing. Most other people, including you, want to secede now and NH exit now. I want to wait until we've concentrated a whole lot of libertarians here, because right now we're a purple state, and if we seceded, we would become a purple country, which is not what I want. The other thing is the messaging. I want to be not, antagonistic. I want to keep it peaceful. I want to actually persuade people all across the country that this is a good thing, we're not being hostile. As opposed to pretty much everyone else who says, we want to secede because Washington is broken, because, we just can't stand being part of the United States. That's not me. It's not that I can't stand it. It's just we would like to do something different. And that's what this book is about.
And, and I'm someone who does like or appreciate positive framing. So I think that's one of the reasons I am quite drawn to the way this is done. A few things that I should qualify. Nexit Now, of course, yes, I do feel some sense of urgency and I do have issues with the federal government. But of course, all our movements here in New Hampshire, and it should be stated up front, are peaceful solutions. The mission of the Foundation for New Hampshire Independence, which I was doing the paperwork for today, clearly states it is to peacefully declare independence and go our separate way from the United States. And it's important for people to understand that because these are peaceful solutions. So I do want to get that out of the way. And then I want to throw a challenge your way.
Okay.
Would we necessarily be a purple state if we were another country? I do feel like the polarization and the sort of politics of parties, Republicans versus Democrats, even in the Libertarian Party where we see this, fight between the left and the right. So in some ways it's just like the problems of the culture wars reduced down to the Libertarian Party.
Yeah.
So it makes even less sense in many ways. I like to think that, and maybe this is naive, but to me, Granite Staters have almost a different flavor. Like I almost feel like they're decent, rugged individualists first. And so if we were a country, I'm not sure we'd be purple. So maybe what I'm saying in a roundabout way is I agree we should have more people move here. But I also think we should be thinking about how we can relate to our neighbors.
Okay. I guess I would agree New Hampshire is a little bit more libertarian leaning than the rest of the country. That's why the Free State Project chose New Hampshire. But it's not enough different. I mean, one sign of that is whenever we introduce a bill to try to secede, it's overwhelmingly defeated. And I think that's because it's a tiny, tiny minority, basically the libertarians who want it, and everybody else says no. So,
and I think that can also just be because it's such a new idea. Certainly, Scotland had talked about independence for a long time. Even Brexit was a long time coming. So sometimes you just have to keep presenting an idea until its time literally comes, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about the book, because what I love about the hook is opting out of income tax. It's not just for millionaires.
Right. So I think a lot of people actually misinterpret that. they hear there are leftist publications who always talk about how millionaires or billionaires aren't paying their fair share, and that they're hiring lawyers who find sneaky ways of getting them out of paying taxes. That is not what I'm talking about. So the millionaires I'm talking about when I say not just for millionaires is people like John Templeton, which many people have never heard of. But John Templeton is a guy who back in the 60s moved to the Bahamas, which is a country with no income tax, and he renounced his U.S. citizenship, which saved him a bunch of money in taxes, and he took that money and he donated it to charity.
Wow.
So he's trying to, I think, I mean, I never knew the guy personally, but I imagine he's trying to show that, no, we're not selfish. We really do believe in charity, and we just think, donating to charity, it makes so much more sense than sending it to the government as taxes. So,
well, and I think there's evidence that is the case, right? Yeah. But there's also something to be said for the stewardship of your own money.
Yes.
And it seems like a no-brainer to me. It's kind of like, well, if I have $1 million, I want to decide who gets the $1 million. I don't want to give it to the government, and then they end up giving it to, Epstein's cronies.
Yeah. So the point I'm making is people like John Templeton, and another one is Eduardo Saverin. He was the one of the founders of Facebook. You may have heard that he moved to Singapore, and he also renounced his citizenship. And a bunch of senators just blew a gasket about that. They said, you're trying to defriend the United States, and they basically tried to make it so he can't ever enter the country ever again. But anyway, so that option exists for millionaires and billionaires. There are countries like Monaco that you can move to if you're a millionaire. But the point we want to make is we want to provide that same option to people who are not millionaires. Just opt out of, just move to a place where there is no income tax, even if you're not a millionaire. That's essentially the gist of this book.
And the 75 is 75,000.
Right. So just to talk about that, people whose income is $75,000 or more, it's one of several demographics that's studied by the IRS in their publication 1304. And they just say, well, this particular group, how much first of all, what percentage of the population are they? And then what percentage of the total tax are they paying? And in the case of people whose income is $75,000 or more, they make up 29% of taxpayers, but they're paying 90% of all federal income tax. So that group is
being shafted is a polite way to put it.
So we're trying to say they would benefit the most. Now, we'll take anybody who just doesn't like income tax for any reason, whether it's philosophical or what. But if your income is $75,000 or more, then you have a very practical reason to be interested in this, because you'll be saving money.
And let's sit just a little bit with the philosophical idea of why income tax is particularly heinous to people like us.
There's a reason that Ron Paul made it one of the planks of his campaign. And there's also a guy named Frank Chodorow who wrote a book, Income Tax, the Root of All Evil. Check it out. It's way back in the 50s. Even back then, they knew that there was something very different about income tax.
We're getting old enough where the old is new again.
Yeah, old is new again. But anyway, so the point I make early on in like the first chapter is called progressive popularity. It just says the reason income tax is so popular is that the majority actually benefit from it. They actually, compared to some other tax like a sales tax or a property tax, an income tax will save the majority money. They kind of shift the burden to the high-income people who are getting shafted. So.
Right. And do I recall correctly that many of the places that have no income tax seem to fill their tax base with VAT? Is that?
Yeah. For example, Monaco does have a VAT
tax. Yeah.
And so does United Arab Emirates. Also has a value-added tax. I don't know about the others, the Bahamas, and
because that is something that I feel one should be realistic, right? Like sometimes I hear people say, "Oh, we should cut this tax. We should cut this tax," and I'm all for cutting taxes. That's part of the reason I'm here in New Hampshire, because again, we don't want people to suffer. We just think that private sector can solve these problems quicker and more efficiently than going through the government, where they would waste a lot of that money. Right. But I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
So I know when we started, I said I wanted to ground our listeners and readers and watchers with the idea a little bit about positive rights.
Okay, yes. So remember the Karl Marx slogan. Well, he didn't originate it, but he made it popular. It's a communist slogan, really, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. So that's kind of two things at once. It's from each according to his ability, that's income tax. And to each according to his need, that's basically positive rights or welfare, whatever you want to call it. And one of the points I'm making is that they go together. You kind of, in order to have a welfare state, you kind of need to have an income tax to pay for it so that you can, because somebody's got to pay for all that. So yeah, they go together. And basically what this book is about is saying there's a bunch of people who would love to opt out of income tax and they're willing to give up positive rights in order to achieve that. So they're willing to trade it off.
And so one of the sort of very concrete suggestions in the book is that in order to get citizenship in this new nation, New Hampshire, we need a sexier name. I like Arcadia, but but we could even do like maybe a play on New Hampshire. I don't know, New Hampshire.
Okay.
I'm kidding. Is that people would actually have to almost sign a contract that actually waives their positive rights.
Exactly. Yes. That is immigration. I know that there's a lot of debate about immigration. What will immigration be like in New Hampshire if we do secede? My view is the one and only condition should be they understand and they thoroughly waive their rights to any positive rights. Beyond that, I don't really care, what their nationality is, what country they're from, I know there are people who care about that, but to me, come on.
No, and I mean, libertarians first and foremost really only, in my esteem, agree on two things: the non-aggression principle and property rights.
Yeah.
And there is a faction now that sort of seems to be confusing most of those things.
Right.
But property rights in a New Hampshire, let's just call it that for tonight, with this waived positive rights, could even extend even further, where we could have a model like Estonia, where you attract digital citizens, right? So you actually create everyone bear with my mixed metaphors here, but you could create the Delaware of digital citizenship, right? Where Delaware, of course, in the 80s, 90s was very well known for the place all the corporations incorporated.
I think it still is, but
I heard it's actually really gone, it's not as competitive as it used to be. And in fact, a place like New Hampshire, I don't know enough about this to speak intelligently, but we have very good trust laws here, apparently some of the best in the world. And I thought, that's interesting, because that could also fit into this sort of idea of you create this Switzerland of the North or this Croatia, where you really take a combination of all the most successful things that do work in other places and then come up with this model here.
Right.
So you mentioned some of the jurisdictions, Bahamas,
right.
a fair amount in the Middle East, the UAE areas, Singapore.
There's kind of two broad categories. There's the places full of rich people like Monaco and really Bermuda. And then there's the oil producing countries. What's different about the UAE is, I could move there. I don't have to be a millionaire to move to the UAE, but they have a welfare state and they just pay for it with oil revenues instead of with an income tax. That's basically how it works.
And some of those states are not that favorable to citizenship.
Oh,
and
right. Yeah,
so,
it takes 30 years to become a citizen of UAE.
And so what one would probably want to do is to sort of create a very desirable citizenship that is around this new entity or territory. And that makes it very interesting, because we are on the cusp of it not just being geographic, but also digital.
Right.
And so, it would be very interesting to see these things develop. Now, I was quite struck by you had almost like a constitution. I mean, I guess you called it the Club 75 Alliance personal statement.
Yeah. This is what we want people to say and fully understand.
And so, I'm actually going to read through it,
Okay,
I think, because
sure,
it's sort of, helpful. The first one is, I do not consent to be governed by the federal government. In particular, I do not consent to federal income tax.
Yeah, okay.
Unequivocal, everyone understands it. I agree and understand that obedience does not imply consent.
Right.
I love that, right? In particular, payment of federal income taxes does not imply consent to that tax.
Right.
Because, of course, that's the argument.
Yeah, right.
It may reflect compliance with an oath, or it may simply indicate a desire to stay out of prison.
There you go. Yes.
This was interesting. So this one says, if I'm elected to office prior to secession, I will obey my oath to support and defend the U.S. Constitution.
Right.
Did this one come up because reps were concerned?
Exactly. It actually came up out of the one of the earliest secession bills where somebody says you're committing treason. And I want to say, well, if we do it our way, we're not committing treason because we are following the Constitution, because we're going to make sure that we get an actual constitutional amendment before we proceed.
Right. And of course, they are told these things, and because it sounds hysterical and fear mongering and scares people. And that was actually how they scared the reps with the two previous bills.
Right.
Just for folks who maybe this subject is very new to, just to back up for 2 seconds. So here in New Hampshire, we've put in 2 constitutional amendments. Those are called CACRs. We did one where we just straight up said, hey, if this passes, you would put the question to the voters of New Hampshire. So really, the State House is just gatekeeping. They should absolutely just vote for it so it's on the ballot so the people can decide. But of course, they don't want to do that. So the original one was CACR 32. That was in 22. And we basically said, hey, we're just going to declare independence. That got a vote of 13 out of 400. So there were 13 original colonies. You got to start somewhere. Today's Friday the 13th. We can just roll with it. Then in early 2024, we listened to feedback and we put in a CACR 32, if I remember 20, that's right. And that one said, if the federal debt reaches $40 trillion, which was a qualifying event, right, tied to something, which I liked a lot, right, because it's sort of, and we thought that would give us 10 years. We've already run out of runway. I mean, we're going to hit 40 trillion in the Trump administration. And then also in 2024, we did HB 1130, which was the study committee bill. And so these are all good faith efforts to have that discussion, to start to bring the question to the people. And I think the reps do such a strong case of gatekeeping because the question might be more popular on the ground than they might like.
I have said for some time, the resistance to secession does not come from the people. It comes from the government.
Yes.
They want to keep power.
So when I was up testifying last week on the one of the bills Glenn Bailey put in this year was a House resolution to support California's desire to split in two. And the idea there was to maybe see if we could get Democrats to find the idea more palatable if it's for their guys, right? Because everyone seems to understand it when it's not their own fiefdom, right? So the next one here is, so here's where we get into the positive rights. I do not expect or want the government of New Hampshire to provide me with positive rights described in Part 3 of the United Nations International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. such as the right to an adequate standard of living or the right to a free education. I hereby explicitly and irrevocably opt out of these positive rights.
I wonder if there are some listeners who may need a 101 on what positive rights are versus negative rights. So I'll briefly cover that.
Yeah.
So a negative right is something that doesn't cost the government money, something like freedom of religion. The government doesn't have to spend money on it. They just have to get out of the way and let you worship as you like. A positive right is something that costs money. So that would be free education or welfare, or there's any number of programs. The negative income tax thing. I forget what it's called. Anyway, you get money back from the government. You don't actually pay income tax, but all of that costs money, and so that would be classified as a positive right.
So the way to think about a negative right is it's free.
Yes.
But really free, not like free education
Right,
where
yeah.
it's like someone has to pay the teachers. Who's paying the teachers?
Exactly. Yep.
And then the last one here, number 5, is I understand and agree that if I become unable to provide for myself, there is always a risk that voluntary charity may not be sufficient to keep me alive. I hereby accept this risk.
Right. Yeah, that's an important one. And I do want to get people thinking about it. I go into some discussion about this, that really you may be in a position where your only ethical option is suicide. And so I wanted people to really think about that. And if they think that's not the case, if they think there's some other option, I'd like to hear about it, because I'm not sure there is any other ethical option. So
now, see, this is where I just put on my marketing hat and I'm like, no, that's a terrible selling point, right? It's like, hey, join our system, and if you fall on hard times, you better kill yourself.
I know that it's unpleasant, but I think this is a case where we need to be realistic there, because the Democrats or the statists are basically saying, you haven't thought this through. What they're asking the question, what are you going to do when you're become destitute and voluntary charity is not enough? And if we just duck that question, we come across as not serious.
So that was one of your desires, and I do think you accomplish it in the book, is sort of to try and sort of meet those points of resistance.
Right, yeah.
So what are some of the main things you hear that people just go, oh no, that's crazy?
We're trying to destroy the country. So one of the things I like to talk about is other secessions. Like, the obvious one is Brexit. Did Brexit destroy the European Union? Of course it didn't. How about the secession of East Timor from Indonesia? Did that destroy Indonesia? No, of course it didn't. So we want to try to get people thinking secession does not destroy the parent country. In fact, if it's done right, if it's done in a civil, peaceful way, it can actually make the parent country stronger.
And of course, it's, people will say, well, you can't leave. And I take offense to that, because it's like to me it sounds like an abusive partner who's like, if you leave me, I'll kill you.
Right. Yeah.
And that is actually the literal argument against secession.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I was up at the State House testifying, I took 30 minutes of questions actually from the Veterans Committee.
Cool.
On the independence study bill. And I thought it was great, because, I've been going up there such a long time, and they had a credible conversation. Like, we had a real conversation where they were asking pointed questions, but also trying to understand. I mean, they did, I think, ITL it, which I expected anyway. Yeah.
But if they're asking the right questions, that's good. That's progress.
I feel that way too. Yeah. Yes. So we continue to sort of have the conversations about it. So you also go on then. So we did. One of the things I hear a lot about is actually the federal debt.
Yes.
And not necessarily in the context where we had it as a triggering event,
right,
but sort of as a, hey, we've been really bad with our money, but if we ever let you go, you're going to have to pay us back too.
Yeah.
What's your position?
So basically the last chapter of my book is all about that. I try to make the argument that making the federal debt a per citizen thing, it makes no sense. That we're basically we're not paying it now. So when people die, I made the example of who was the guy who was in broadcast news. Anyway, he died sort of recently in 2022, and I made the argument that back in 1950 when he was born, the debt was much less, and now it's really high. And during his lifetime, this actor, whose name I can't remember, didn't pay any share of his debt. So if he's not paying his share, why should any of us pay our share? It doesn't make sense to say that suddenly the people who are still alive need to pay their share.
Right. And not only pay their share, but on the flip side, of that welfare coin that we were talking about, the Social Security is not going to be there.
Yeah.
It really, in some ways, isn't already, right?
Right.
So you would repudiate the debt?
Well, what I pointed out is there's another way to measure the debt, and that is how much benefits we've received from the government compared to the taxes we've paid. And you and I have both made this argument that we have been a net payer for many, many years, and so you could say, well, whatever New Hampshire got, we've already paid that back and more through additional taxes. So that is the right way to measure the amount we need to pay. And actually, the guy in Texas, Daniel Mitchell, he makes this
Miller.
Sorry, Daniel Miller. Yeah, he makes this same argument that Texas has been a net donor, and so Texas shouldn't have to pay if they secede.
Right. And so back to the different sort of flavors of independence movements. Even in the United States, we have a Californian movement. There's the Texas movement, which I would say is more conservative.
Well, yeah, of course, because Texas is a red state.
California is more progressive. There's, of course, the Hawaii independence movement. I think they probably, out of all of the different flavors, have the strongest claim.
Yeah.
Of course, because that was a monarchy overthrown by cronies for crony capitalism,
right.
And had their own culture, their own space, and all of that. The thing I found interesting up at the State House is they asked everyone except me if they say the pledge. And I thought, now, isn't that interesting? Because really the Pledge of Allegiance has really very little to do with American history. I mean, it's a very modern thing. It was written by a socialist, Bellamy, if I remember correctly.
Right, yeah.
And the committee definitely treated that like I gotcha. Poor Glenn was like, they were like, do you say the pledge? And Glenn was like, yeah, I do. Then why are you bringing this bill forward? Where do you fall out on the pledge?
Yeah, I think I have never said it voluntarily. I've always, and I imagine Glenn doesn't either. Whenever he's said it, it's because he's under duress. He's kind of expected to say it. So it's almost like, usually it's children who are in school taught to recite it, and you can't really say that that's legally binding on them because they're told what to say and they don't really have a choice.
It's sort of compelled speech.
Yeah.
And I did the math once. I'm not going to remember the number off the top of my head. But if let's say kids go to school for 275 days of the year, right? Yeah. And then you multiply that by 12 years, just the number of the actual neural programming of the conditioning, right? Because they all were like, it says it's indivisible.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, because you were forced as a child to say this rote thing that literally makes your brain think that.
Yeah.
But in the last 200 years, we've gone from 80 countries to over 200 countries. The trend is definitely towards more and smaller.
Yeah.
So, history is in our favor here, I believe.
Right, yeah. I regarding the schoolhouse indoctrination, there's one way that I think it's worked in our favor, and that is they teach this phrase consent of the governed. At least when I was a kid, it was a big part of this is what makes America different from other countries, consent of the governed. So that's why I have a whole chapter on consent of the governed where I make the moral case that consent of the governed means we should be able to secede, because as soon as D.C. no longer has the consent of the governed in New Hampshire, it becomes uncivilized for them to govern here. So.
And actually, I really like that suggestion, because yours is that we would put in another CACR, so a
Right.
constitutional amendment, which does have high bars. It has to pass the House and Senate and the
Right.
governor at 3/5, and then it has to actually pass the voters at 67%.
Yep.
And but I loved that idea, because your proposal was to, instead of saying, hey, we want to peaceably secede and separate,
Right.
you're like saying, hey, federal government, you no longer have the consent of the
Exactly.
governed.
Yeah. It's not illegal to say, it's carefully not illegal to say that, but it accomplishes the goal of, therefore, according to the Declaration of Independence, morally, you're on thin moral ground, basically.
And of course, and they did not like this at the hearing, but Texas versus White, which of course is the Supreme Court case that said, oh, you're not allowed to secede. Oh, let's see, government, you guys came, you stacked the deck and then made this rule. And so one of them, I could see they were Googling under the desk, and they like came at me with the Supreme Court decision that said that's not allowed. And my answer was, well, didn't they just overturn Roe v. Wade?
That's one way to go. Yep. Actually, what I like to point out is Texas v. White outlawed unilateral secession, but a negotiated secession is still possible according to that. So, and that's really what I'm going for. I want the American people to just agree. Instead of making an argument of whether it is legal, I'd rather make the moral case that it should be legal.
So, okay, so walk us through that, like your strategy.
Okay, so I have basically three strategies that I'm going to put them all together. The first one is simply other secessions. Look at, starting with July 4th. I mean, heck, this country was born out of secession. How do you feel about that secession? Most people will say, okay, well, that one was justified. Because
all right.
Okay, so then we say, well, no, it's not just that in modern times it's no good, because what about, as I said, the secession of East Timor? What about the secession of Eritrea from Ethiopia, South Sudan from Sudan, and then, of course, Bosnia from Yugoslavia?
Herzegovina.
Yeah, so even if all of those have been recognized now by the United Nations, presumably you would agree that those secessions are justified. So the question I want people to think about is, when is secession justified? What are the ground rules? What makes a secession a good civilized thing versus something that should be stopped? And the case I want to make is, if you have, as soon as you no longer have the consent of the governed, that's one condition. Another condition is you should be making reasonable accommodations for the loyalists. So the loyalists, there's loyalists in any secession. Those are the people who prefer to stay under the parent country. So in 1776, of course, they were the people who wanted to continue to be ruled by Britain. We didn't treat them very well. We kind of treated them like enemies. But so even in other secessions, like the independence of India, believe it or not, even there were some loyalists who wanted to stay under British rule. But anyway, so the point is, we need to treat them nicely and treat them with respect so that it's a civilized thing. And I have a whole chapter about loyalists talking about how to do that. So,
And would you see a solution like that, maybe even being dual citizenship?
yeah, well, so when they, after the secession doesn't actually affect anyone's citizenship. If you were a U.S. citizen before, you still are. And it just creates a new kind of citizenship called New Hampshire citizenship. And we, libertarians, would presumably be renouncing our U.S. citizenship and becoming just New Hampshire citizens so that we're free of income tax. For those who don't know...
Or, I mean, I could see the federal government being... penalizing people and making it part of the negotiation to be like, no, you would have to give up your American citizenship, right?
Okay.
As a punishment, I suppose.
Okay.
As a negotiation
But
tactic.
I would rather they not do that to the loyalists. That's the point.
Right.
If someone said, no, we don't want to secede, the government shouldn't be forcing them to give up their citizenship.
Because they were also really proclaiming that they do have the consent of that person.
Right.
So let's stop with consent for a little bit because, during COVID, I was so surprised that we weren't having more conversations about that, especially with regard to informed consent, which was one of the topics I got heavily censored on because as a lawyer, that was the area I was really interested in. And you mentioned, you had learned about the consent of the governed.
Right.
And I feel like when I became an American citizen, I too, that was still very forward in the conversation. But it's not really something we hear about anymore.
I wonder, are they just not teaching it in school anymore?
I don't think so. Okay. And really not teaching the right of conscience, which I think is almost the precursor of consent, right? Like,
I should talk, ask my nephew whether they talked about it when he was going to school. So, I don't know. I would like to know if they're...
I'm almost certain they're not teaching anything about the Constitution anymore because...
So there's no concept of American history, what the Revolutionary War was all about? My gosh, I hope that's...
I might be wrong, but it doesn't seem that way. And in many ways, I think it's because the fallacy is very visible now. And what I mean by that is I was struck once. I was talking to my neighbor who is a porcupine who'd gone to, a nice-ish private school, let's say, right? And no, it was a public school. And he said where his aha moment was, maybe as a junior in high school, was that they were learning about the Constitution, but then everyone realized, but we don't have any of these rights in the school that is owned by the government.
Right.
And it's kind of like when you discover, there's a Constitution-free zone within 100 miles,
right,
where you're just like, wait, what now? Yeah. How does that work? Yeah. Just some judge was like, this is how it's going to work now. Yeah. So the consent of the governed is your little magic piece, your little angle. Have you tried to put in a CACR for that yet, or?
No, again, I don't, I want to talk about it, which is why I'm good with the study bill, but I don't actually want to secede until there's a whole lot more libertarians.
Okay. So within your strategy, it is still a concentration play.
Yes.
So how do you see that sort of developing?
Okay, well, that's kind of what my governor campaign is about. I feel like as a governor candidate, of course, I'm not going to win, but I can. It does actually get noticed outside of New Hampshire. I know this because I have gotten emails from people saying, "I saw your website. I love your website," and these are people outside New Hampshire. So
can we come up with a gimmick for you? Like Vermin with those boots. Because they would always let him do the debates, right? Yeah. And that would generate a fair amount of, you're like, no, I'm too serious for that, Carla.
Yeah, it's kind of, I want to keep it serious. But one thing I can do is at the Libertarian National Convention, I plan to set up a booth where because I saw someone else doing this, essentially advertising their governor campaign. So I'll advertise mine and say, well, mine's different from the others because we're pushing concentration.
So do I remember correctly you did run once before?
Yeah, in 2024.
Okay.
And I want to try to do it again this year.
And what did you learn last time?
I actually was surprised and happy that I got invited to a debate stage and I got to be on a debate. I didn't do especially well, but I thought I at least did the closing statement reasonably well.
And also, every time we do hard things that we've never done before, you learn something,
exactly.
And hopefully the next time you go back and you're a little better.
Yeah. I hopefully will do a lot better this year.
Okay. And so what would you say to someone who's going to be like, you're going to be a spoiler?
That's where approval voting comes in.
Okay.
My top short-term priority is approval voting. I want to get the message out that approval voting completely solves the spoiler problem and there is essentially no downside.
And that is different to ranked choice voting.
Ranked choice voting is complicated. It's expensive. It's hard to explain what it is. with approval.
I mean, I'm not the smartest person with numbers, but I'm not the dumbest either. And I'm like, I've been listening to that pitch for like 15 years and I still don't understand
Okay.
it. So, yes,
All
your version better.
All right, yeah. So approval voting, if there is somebody out there who just says, they don't even have to know that there is approval voting. If they just go in, since the ballots are the same, the only change is you can vote for more than one. But if they just never hear about that and I didn't even know there was approval voting, I'm just going to vote the way I always have, no problem. It'll be pretty much what they should have voted anyway. So no problem.
And so what efforts have been made with regard to that? I do believe Maine got ranked choice.
Yeah,
at
Maine
one
has ranked choice
stage.
voting. I believe Alaska and Hawaii also have approval ranked choice
Ranked
voting.
choice.
No state has approval voting, but Fargo, North Dakota has it for municipal elections, I believe.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. So maybe we could try and introduce it on a city level with, try it
Yeah.
in Manchester. Sometimes so we have big ideas
Yeah.
and then there's the little shit you have to do in between, right?
Yeah.
And so one of those for me was always, well, maybe one day we could get West Manchester to split off from Manchester proper, because Bedford originally was part of Manchester and Bedford split off maybe 25, 30 years ago now
did
to
not know that.
build
Okay.
the high school. That was the big fight because it was the wealthier part of town and they wanted this really expensive high school. And they were like, well, then we're going to make our own town. And that's where they went off to. So there is precedent for it. And I thought, well, that could be interesting to sort of figure out what the steps are and to start to have those conversations, because you do it maybe on a small level and then you make it bigger.
Right.
But strategically possibly keep doing it from the bottom up and the top down. So approval voting as sort of something that needs to happen. What else do you see are those little incremental things?
In the short term, there's really not much else. I mean, on my campaign, I'm listing fully legalizing marijuana. There's Defend the Guard, which may happen this year anyway. And then there's medical assistance in dying. That's Dennis Pratt's favorite bill. And that's a good example of how we're different from Republicans, because Republicans are the ones who don't like medical assistance in dying.
Yeah, and that was so interesting to me because it was an issue I felt very strongly about when I originally moved here. And I was so surprised at the backlash that I just was like, well, I'm not going to expend my political capital on this right now.
Yeah.
I'll expend it on independence.
There you go. Yeah.
The farthest anchor.
Well, I think it's a religious thing. It's certainly in their platform. One of their platform planks is that they oppose assisted suicide. So that's in the GOP platform.
And and I do see both sides of the issue, especially as we're seeing in places like Canada with socialized medicine, where there's now, and Australia actually, where there are pushes, to steer people towards that outcome because it's expedient for the government. All right, so what else do you feel like we should cover? I think, what I really liked about the book as well is all the little case studies and the way you sort of explained it.
Yeah. So there were various places where I had two hypothetical people talking about a subject, because I felt that's a good way to present the thing. So, for example, in the federal debt section, I had to explain why it makes no sense to have per citizen federal debt. I had a conversation where people just somebody thought it should be that way, and this Hannah woman walked them through just a thought process that led to an absurd conclusion. So, so I feel like that's a good way to go. And then there was just the whole section on selling secession. So, we talk about Bosnia. There's a section on Bosnia. There's a section on Canada, the whole Quebec independence movement. And then a hypothetical one where it's about abortion. Let's imagine a world where there's a strong majority wants to ban abortion, and so now it's the underdog minority that wants to carve out a place that will secede and become a place where abortion is legal. So that I thought that example might resonate with people. So
Interesting. So, if you were a king, what would your ideal New Hampshire look like?
Just like in here. So independent country, no income tax, no positive rights, and then pretty much anyone can come in as long as they sign this waiver, basically.
And it would be a waiver and not some kind of income requirement.
Right, no income requirement. Just
Right.
you got to understand there'll be never ever be any welfare for you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, if contracts worked the way they're actually supposed to work
Yeah.
and not this, progressive way, it was one of the things that blew my mind as a young lawyer is, you're taught in law school how important words are, how important a contract is, how, you want it to be the clear meaning so that you and I have a clear concept of what we are agreeing to and
Right.
all of those things. And then you get in the real world. And the last company I worked for during the dot-com era, and to tell you how shady they were, they went from a $6 billion market cap in 1999, 2000 to being delisted for trading under $1.
Mm.
And I remember the first time I read their services contract, and I was like, this is junk.
Yeah, yeah.
And I went to my general counsel, my boss at the time, and I was like, this contract is really ambiguous. We need to sit down, and I had all these suggestions, and she just looked me dead in the eye and she's like, it's like that on purpose. And I realized I'd made a severe mistake from leaving my, so the problem with contracts is they are not necessarily enforceable. So if I'm putting on my negative hat just for a second, we might need to see reform in the courts as well.
Right.
Or there would have to be how.
I actually see this. I don't intend this to be an enforceable contract. I just think it's just more like a big old warning, big red flag. If you move to New Hampshire, you're not getting any welfare, and we want to do our very best to make sure you understand that. But if you sneak around it, or if you just ignore it, well, it's going to be on you. If you ever become destitute and voluntary charity is not enough, guess what? You're probably going to die because there'll be no welfare for you. And we tried to warn you. That's all it is.
And what kind of government would you see?
Otherwise, I'd like to keep the New Hampshire government pretty much as it is.
So a large body as we have, the governor becomes
Now,
the president.
Yeah. As for whether we keep the executive council, for a while at least.
Well, you see what I like about the EC is that they actually have to vet every single government contract over
Right, yep.
$10,000. That's not a lot of money.
Right, yeah.
And I love that, they have to do it. In fact, I think that's one of the more powerful positions in New Hampshire that, Free Staters have not taken a swing at over the
Right.
years. Perhaps suggesting that the time has come.
Right, maybe, yeah.
I'm not the numbers person, but that could be an interesting role because
So you think that the current EC is not limiting the governor enough, or?
I think we don't actually know what's going on with the finances.
Right.
And part of that is probably just that no one knows what's going on
Yeah,
with
yeah,
anything anymore. And a lot of it just doesn't make sense, right? And the more you dig down. But for example, last year they were doing budget cuts, and I had worked on creating. I testified against it, to be fair, but Right to Know New Hampshire was supporting the ombudsman's office because we wanted to create a citizens ombudsman to sort of solve the problem of the right to know requests not being filled out. And instead of having to sue and go to court every time, if we go through here, it would be cheaper. But then the guy they hired wrote 80 pages of rules. And I was like, this is worse than going to court. Oh, no. And so they cut that as part of the budget cuts. And, I was kind of mad because I was like, ma. And someone was like, but everyone wants us to keep cutting taxes, but we do still have to fund programs.
Yeah.
Would you see us moving to a more privatized model?
To the extent possible, yes.
What would that look like?
So
Help people understand.
initially, we would keep pretty much the taxes we have now, which is, of course, the property tax. And boy, I'd like to at least get rid of the business enterprise tax. But a business tax, okay, it's not my favorite, but we do, as you say, we do need to fund the government. But I see it just as we didn't really talk about grandfathering. So let me just say a few words about grandfathering. So the loyalists, I don't want them to suddenly go without welfare. So I want to arrange that they are grandfathered in at least for some period of time. And I know that's a controversial thing to say, but again, I want us to come across as being generous and willing to play well, play nicely with people so that we can stay on good terms with other states and with the federal government. I want a relationship with the federal government similar to what Monaco has with France. So the way grandfathering would work is, if possible, they would still get all the government benefits they have now. The ace in the hole that I think we have is the fact that they still have to pay federal income tax. You know, the United States is the only major country where you have to, citizens, even if they're living outside the United States, still have to pay federal income tax. So I say, let's make that work in our favor for a change. So now these loyalists are still paying federal income tax. Now we can make the moral argument, hey, they're still paying federal income tax, so they still deserve federal benefits. So we'll make an argument as part of this secession negotiation. Let's say, hey, federal government, can you just continue what you've been doing so far? So most of our welfare programs are really joint programs between New Hampshire and the federal government. Things like TANF and obviously SNAP. If we can just get them to continue, but only for people who were already in New Hampshire as of the time of the secession. Anyone who moved in afterward is not grandfathered. So where was I going with that? But so, yeah, that's an example. So there would still for a while be a Department of Health and Human Services, but it would be gradually shrinking as more people moved out. Oh, that's the other thing. I would like to, if someone just says, I can't stand it in New Hampshire anymore, I want to move somewhere else, we would pay for their relocation. Because, again, we want to come across as generous and just fully accommodating.
You mean the relocation of the loyalists?
Yes.
Okay, so
there would
be a cutoff point at some stage. Like you can't be the hobo coming up from Massachusetts who's
only people who are already there. Yes.
Okay, gotcha. I always get my good libertarian stripes is like, what? No, we're not going to subsidize.
No, but the point is that whatever it costs to move them to, even if they're moving to California or Hawaii or something, it's got to be less than even 1 year of public education or whatever it is we're spending on them. So.
It's got to be less. And honestly, it is shocking. This is a total side note, but in New Hampshire, because of the IEPs, which is a special classification on certain education on certain students, they can cost up to $250,000 per student.
Yeah.
So I have heard of small towns where they will actually offer to buy a house for the family in a different district just to get them off their books. And I thought, and then I thought, well, that is a market solution.
Yeah.
You know, so one always has to look at these things with curiosity and openness. There are no wrong answers here. You know, we're just talking about ideas. We're just saying maybe there are better ways to do things. I want to talk about Estonia a little bit because I just recently sort of realized what a good comparison it is.
They're almost exactly the same size as New Hampshire.
Right? So geographic, population size. And Estonia has a pretty awesome success story. I mean, they left when the USSR collapsed, and they decided to create this sort of very modern digital
I heard about that.
citizenship.
Yep.
And so that could be a good role model for us to look at, maybe a road trip to Estonia.
Yeah. Never been there, but yeah.
Me either, but it's, that whole area I haven't really explored. So I was like, I'd be down. I've heard good things. So maybe we need to plan a independence summit in the EU sometime. All right, so I'm going to fade in a little bit. I want to make sure we have covered everything you want to.
We could say a few words about Puerto Rico and the territory option, because I know
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
sorry, it was on my notes. Yeah.
A lot of people bring it up and say, "Well, why don't you just move to Puerto Rico, or why don't you just, instead of seceding, why don't you just become a territory?" So that chapter is addressing that issue. And the first thing I want to point out is, if you're in a territory, you don't. Well, you still have to pay either FICA if you're employed, or self-employment tax if you're self-employed. And if you're at the $75,000 level up to, maybe, I don't know where the break point is, but it's at the low end of that self-employment tax is way more than your regular income tax. So even if you could get rid of the regular income tax, you're not saving all that much. You're still going to have to pay the self-employment tax. So I want total secession so that we can be free of the self-employment tax too. The other thing is, just moving to Puerto Rico doesn't work, because although they don't have to pay federal income tax, they have their own income tax. And it's true that they've had some programs that help investors who want to move there, but just ordinary worker bees like me, they still have to pay income tax. It might be a little lower, but there's still an income tax. So it's not much of a, if I wanted to move to a place that had a lower income tax, I think I'd rather go to like Singapore or something, which their tax is lower, and it's probably quality of life is better there anyway. So
yes, it is very humid, but air conditioning can solve a lot of problems. Yes. I was actually quite intrigued when I heard that. I'd heard it before, but maybe forgotten it. So when the territories came up, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because Guam will be in the news from time to time, and obviously Puerto Rico. And it's more familiar to people in America. So maybe it is a at least good touch point in these discussions,
right,
to help people understand, maybe the counter, I would have to come up with a more polite way to do this. But, if the Veterans Committee is sort of like, America's indivisible, and the 50 stars in the 50 states. And it's like, well, don't we have 7 territories and, 192 military bases and, right? So it's like, it depends where you're looking at the story. In the same way you just said, this country was born from secession. You can't tell me I can't secede.
Yeah.
It's the most American thing I could do. Bam.
Yeah.
All right. So tell folks where they can find your book and where they can find you and how they can support your race and all of that good stuff.
Club75alliance.com. Is it on the screen? Yes, it is. Okay. Go there, and if you go to the manifesto, there is a option to buy the book. There's a button. I think it might be at the bottom that says buy the book, and that will take you to a place where for $10 you can get a copy of this thing. We'll be running for governor. I actually will be looking for people to help me with ballot access. And I don't want to depend on the LPNH. I don't want to pay people to stand in front of Market Basket, because that's just not what I want to do. I want to try to find people who either they are willing to sign, or their friends, or their friends of friends, or friends of friends. Because, in 2024, 16,000 people voted for me, and we only need 3,000 signatures. So if all of those people signed, we'd be done. But the problem is, of course, I don't have contact information for them. So
and ballot access, of course, is how they keep the state purple instead of yellow and black, because they're all working together. And this is a conspiracy theory I'm seeding to the world. I have zero, folks, evidence for this, but it's my gut feeling. New Hampshire is purple because we've only sent Democrats to Congress, federal government. It was one of the first states that got the Dominion machines, and we were first in the nation. And I wonder if all those things are more connected than we understand.
It is truly a curious thing that at the federal level, we're all Democrat, but within the state, we're more and more red.
It makes it strange. And, and actually in my time here, 18 years that I've been here, the Republican Party has become at least 5% stronger,
Yeah,
and that is definitely thanks to the work of free staters and small government activists. Anything else that you wish I'd asked?
Maybe I'll mention my campaign for governor is at Villee4nh.com.
Okay, that's Villee.
Digit 4nh.com. Yeah. So that's where, if you want to just sign up there and just, you can email me your contact info if you're willing to help with ballot access. That'd be good. I think that's about it.
Okay, so I am so grateful that you came and joined me for a little independence after hours here at our cool podcast studio. Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. Of course, again, my guest tonight was Steve Villee, Club 75 Alliance Manifesto. My last question will be like, weren't you nervous to put the word manifesto out there?
Manifesto has a bad rap. It sounds like something radical and violent, and I guess I want to. I'm trying to think of a good
words for their real meanings.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a good manifesto that is. Well, in computer science, whenever we submit some software, there's always a manifesto that goes with it, which is not violent at all. So I guess that's how I think of it. But,
okay, because I was struck by it. I love it, but I was surprised because it does have that sort of double meaning.
Yeah.
But I thought it was provocative as well.
Yeah.
And, you got to be a little spicy.
Yep.
There we have it.
Yep.
All right. Thanks so much for joining me. And to everyone back home, I wish you, because I could see you, peace, love, and understanding. And I will see everyone back here next week.